Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos. Of course, it is Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And regular guest here on the show, friend of the show, I think one of our resident attorneys here. He's also an amazing content creator, host of the Mofongo Wars podcast. Our guy, Luisito Rio. How you feeling, my brother?
I'm doing good, brother. It's nice to hear from you again. We haven't spoken in a hot minute.
I know. It's been a little bit. I think it only felt right with some of the breaking news over the last week or so that we had you back on. Obviously, you are always heavy in the conversations surrounding Donald Trump. So I want to get your take, especially as an attorney. So we'll definitely dive into that. Regardless of what some people on TikTok think, you are an actual attornay, a real live attorney. So it's been proven time and time again. Yeah, so says the license. Even though TikTok apparently has a higher authority. I don't know. The comment section thinks they have a higher authority than the license that you have. But neither here nor there. We're going to talk Trump and this conviction. We're also going to touch on the idea of having kids and age and sort of, I think it's a topic of conversation, particularly for my generation, waiting longer and longer. But there was an interesting article about Eva Mendes talking about why she waited. I know that you yourself have children, so I always would love to pick your brain on that, the idea of kids. We're also in a positive side of things, man. Mexico elected its first female president, so we'll talk a bit about that. And also it's Pride Month, right? So we're going to talk about a really historic event that was actually led by women of color that is not spoken about quite enough when we talk about the idea of pride. There we go. He's got his pride sweatshirt on today, so we love to see it. So we'll start, as we always do, with the nonsense, with the BS, in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
All right, man. So let's just hop into Trump first and foremost, right? This is, one of the biggest news stories of the last week, rightfully so. This is unprecedented. A former president being charged, and not only just charged with one count, but 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. And he's going to be sentenced on July 11th, which is ironically days before the Republicans are going to formally pick him for the candidate for the Republican Party to give him the nomination officially. And as to be expected, there has been a lot of conversation on both sides around this whole thing. I think first and foremost, let's put aside. I like to put aside a bit of. You and I are on the same page when it comes to our thoughts on Donald Trump. But I want to sort of break down the magnitude and the sort of just stain that this is on our country, first and foremost, when it comes to a former president being, a convicted felon now. And I'd love to kind of hear, your perspective as an attorney. And when you go through law school, one of the things that they sort of try to instill in you is really just upholding the rule of law, right? And being a sound human being and understanding the responsibility that comes with having the license of an attorney, right? And as president, we're talking tenfold the responsibility that comes with that, right? So I'm curious for you, as somebody who took an oath to really uphold the rule of law, what is your take on this, putting aside personal feelings?
Yeah, it's one of those things that is a stain in the history and the background of America. It's quite sad because this is the first time ever that a president, an ex-president, has been formally charged with the commission of a crime and found guilty by a jury of his peers. So it's definitely something that we don't carry lightly. It's an embarrassment to, us as a nation. But it's also an embarrassment for the amount of people that think it's just something that is fabricated. I think that makes it even worse, right? The general distrust that the citizens of the United States have against our judicial system and the people that found him guilty beyond reasonable doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is the sort of extra caveat that is even sort of scarier, because you look at even just the numbers. They're saying that in May alone, the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee as a whole raised about $141 million, right? And they're saying a lot of that was piggybacked off of sort of this court case and him making himself out to be some sort of political prisoner almost, right? And to your point, what does it say about our society, our country as a whole, when arguably half of the country doesn't believe in the rule of law? They believe that this person is above that, right? And that's literally the foundation of our country. That's what sets us apart from other countries around the world that, you know, we quote unquote look down upon, right? That aren't as civilized or aren't as organized as the United States, as, you know, supposedly the greatest democracy, you know, and government the world has ever seen. What does it say when we don't respect the rule of law anymore and we keep coming up with excuses? And again, I think it'd be different if it was like these were fringe people, right? It was like a few people off somewhere in the middle of nowhere. But again, we're talking about arguably half of the country is still standing behind this man. And also one of the two major political parties is 100% standing by him. And not only that, but also adding to the noise and the confusion and the distractions in just sort of questioning the legitimacy of our justice system as a whole. And I think that's what's maybe even scarier than the idea of an ex-president. It's the idea of like what this means for anybody believing in the rule of law and order going forward.
Correct. That part worries me more than the actual charges, because the charges are the charges, and only him being found guilty, the only thing it proves is that our legal system works.
Right.
That is doing what it's designed to do, that nobody is above the law, that we don't have a king like Game of Thrones, that we have a human being that is chosen, and is that human being is given the entire trust of the people of the United States via the Electoral College and voting, and that person, you know, betrayed that trust, and the system obviously punishes him for that. The bigger problem at hand is the amount of conspiracy theories of uneducated humans, of people who don't have all the information and think they do, spewing garbage, nonsense, and misinformation out there, saying that Joe Biden prosecuted him, that the Democrats are after him, that this is a kangaroo court, that the judge is bought by the Democrats. You know, horrific shit that is not only causing more division for the country, but it's also putting us in a precarious position where we basically are questioning each other's truths and just spewing garbage out there that is simply untrue. And it's very damaging to the core and the fabric of freedom, democracy, and our legal system in the United States. And like you said, it's more worrisome that it's not 2 or 3 people. We're talking in the millions,
right?
You know, and these are the same people that think that Jewish space lasers started fires, that there's a secret guy called Q that handles everything,
right?
That Hillary is drinking baby's blood underneath a pizza factory. It's just, you know, we are being held hostage by members of a cult.
Yeah.
And there's no end in sight.
No, absolutely. Well, I think, you know, to that point of no end in sight, because of social media and the lack of filtration there and the quickness that information travels, anybody can get on there, say some bullshit, and it can be spread literally worldwide to millions upon millions of people unchecked, right? And to your point, there are a lot of uneducated people who are not qualified to decipher what is real information, what is wrong, or who even give a shit enough to actually just do some real research, right? And look it up. And it's this perfect storm that we live in right now, where you have somebody like Donald Trump, who has always been, even prior to getting into politics, sort of this master manipulator and this ultimate marketer. But now, with the advent of social media, and also I think the larger scope of a world or a country that as a whole, regardless of what side you exist on, feels like their government isn't doing enough to protect them. It's like this perfect storm of a shit show and an opportunity for someone as manipulative as Donald Trump to become this incredibly powerful figure and sort of use the everyday person and their sort of trauma to his advantage to maintain ultimate power at the end of the day.
Correct. Yeah, it's these people are not even qualified to make a cup of coffee at 7-Eleven. I mean, they have no legal knowledge, no knowledge of nothing. There were doctors when the pandemic hit. Yep. They got their certification that week. They got the diploma and they passed the MCATs. They did everything that week. Yeah. And then when Trump got found guilty, then they went to law school that week again. It took him it took me 4 years. It took him like a week. I'm like, this is amazing. I want to go to this law school. Trumpers go. It's fucking insane. No, bro, I mean, this is ridiculous.
No, it is, and it's scary. And I want to go over some of the misconceptions, right? Let's clear up some of the misconceptions that we've been hearing on the internet. I've seen you going in, reading some of the comments on TikTok. I've also just seen people saying random shit on the internet as well. Yeah. So
I'm glad you got 10 hours. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're gonna do a few. We can do a whole fucking season-long podcast on all the bullshit.
You can put it on Netflix.
Right, exactly. We're gonna do a few. But you as an attorney, somebody who went to school for this, you practice law, to the best of your knowledge, let's clear up some of the misconceptions and I think just some relevant questions even, right? Yeah. And I think for a lot of people seeing it, let's compare, okay, random regular person gets brought up on 34 felony counts of falsifying, business records in New York.
Yeah.
Are they walking out of the courthouse that same day just like he did?
No fucking way. No fucking way. You don't even get to the parking lot. If you were a normal person, normal, and let me tell you this, you don't even have to be a normal person. Martha Stewart, who is a world-renowned, famous, everybody knows who Martha Stewart is.
Right.
The lady with the cooking.
Yeah.
She got sent to 6 months in a federal prison for violating the law.
Right.
She's not even normal. So imagine you or me. No, you would do the 1.5 years of jail, if not more, because it's just, but you also have to understand the position that the judge is in. He knows that he has to put a person in jail that has a cult following, that are a bunch of maniacs.
Right.
That will go after you and your family and everyone that you love and possibly cost you your life. And you're also never going to be at peace in this country if you send that man to prison. So the judge is thinking about all these things. He might say no, and he will fucking say, fuck it, I'm gonna give him jail. Have a possibility. I don't think so.
Right.
Because it's just a different human. Donald Trump is a monolith within the GOP and this country, and they know what's at stake. So yeah, normal people, if it was a normal person, yeah, definitely you go to jail. But not him. I don't think. I could be wrong though.
Right. And what about day of? Would somebody have to post bond to be able to walk out of there, or would they be a free person until sentencing essentially?
Well, he's already he's already out on bond because he's but now we have to wait for the appeal, so it's going to take a while.
Right.
And the appeal, it could take 6 months, it could take a year, it depends on how fast the courts are willing to work. I'm thinking that in New York, they'll probably do it pretty quick because it's a case of notoriety. It's public, it's important.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, he'll remain out until they make a determination whether it's going to be jail time or probation. And once they make that determination, then either he goes to prison to extinguish his sentence or he's out on bail, on probation. Yeah, right. But we don't know yet. People ask me, do you think he's going to jail? I say no. There's attorneys that think yes. They're going to make a sample out of him. I think not, because this is his first offense. He doesn't have a criminal record. Technically speaking, they haven't caught him yet. Only this time. So I don't think he's going to do jail because of who he is. But, there's always the possibility. We'll see.
Right. That makes sense. And then I know the answer to this personally, but I saw a lot of people saying, oh, well, the Supreme Court is going to get him out of this. This goes up to the Supreme Court. Obviously, what is the actual law here because of the type of case?
No, it's a state case. So the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction on it. It goes to the First Circuit Appeals of the Court of New York, and then to the Appeals Court of New York, the highest court of New York. After that is done, the only way that they could pull it to the Supreme Court of the United States is there was a constitutional right, a fundamental right of the accused violated, which there was none. If you look at the docket of the case, at no time did they file a motion saying that Donald Trump's rights, constitutional rights, were being violated. All you have to do is go read the docket. Every single document, every motion in limine, everything is there. And at no time did he allege that his constitutional rights were being violated. He had a jury of his peers chosen by his lawyers and the DA's lawyers chosen, judge him and say that he's guilty beyond reasonable doubt on all 34 counts. So none of his constitutional rights were infringed. Zero. His silence was never interpreted. He had a right to an attorney. He had a right to a speedy trial, which was done fairly quick. He had a right to present evidence on his behalf and to confront the people that were accusing him of the crime, and to cross-examine that evidence. No, there's nothing. He had every single right known to mankind under the Constitution of the United States and the laws of New York. He's fucking done.
Right.
The problem is that Fox News and Trumpers, they spew a lot of misinformation, and then these people are like pet shop parrots, right? And they repeat the same things because they're dumb as nails. Right. They don't know law. They just repeat the same shit that other people are saying. Oh, the constitutional rights were violated. And to that, fantastic. If their constitutional rights were violated, they must have brought it into court. So show me the motion where they said that it was being violated and why.
Right. Well,
they never come up with my comments with anything because they don't know what they're talking about.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, to your point, that's what somebody like Fox News will do. They'll throw out this sort of asinine hypothetical, and then their fan base, not understanding it completely as really just a fucking left field hypothetical, will run with it as a fact almost, right? So I'm sure a pundit on Fox News said, well, hypothetically, if his constitutional rights were violated, this could go to the Supreme Court, right? So then they're going to interpret that as this is going to the Supreme Court. They're going to end up in your comments saying stupid shit, right? Like that. That's literally just like the Fox News funnel of misinformation and like redirection and confusing on purpose, and then like you said, they just parrot that sort of over and over into nonsense. And one of the other things was the case being rigged, right? That this is a rigged case. I would love for you to break down the process of selecting a jury and the idea that the judge wasn't the one even handing down this verdict, right? It was his peers, right? The jury, and how that process even works for anybody. Let's really break down this for clarity's sake.
Yeah, it's fairly easy. What you do is they call what's something called a random panel, right? You get a notice on the mail as a citizen of the state of New York, and usually in the neighborhood and the district and the county where the case is happening. And they call you upon to do your public service as a juror. And you go in, and if you don't have any impediments for serving as a juror, if you're not on vacation, if you're not like physically unable to get there, if you're of age and you serve the basic requisites, then you go and sit on that panel. That panel is a lot of people, usually like 150, 200 people. And then the DA, Bragg, and also the lawyers from Trump choose. Hey, you have a little doggy there.
Yeah, my dog.
That's great. I have a cat. Mine is a little more quiet.
I saw him floating around before. Yeah.
You get the panel, and then you start doing something called peremptory challenges. And challenges that might be motivated. So some of them, you're going to choose the juror based on the interview that you give him, right? Do you think you can judge this case impartially? Do you know Donald Trump? Have you seen him in the past? Are you, typically, how do you lean? Are you more conservative? Do you think that the government is out to get you? The little questions to gauge the person's knowledge and the person's thoughts on a certain topics in regards. And then you, as a lawyer, choose whether that juror benefits your person that you're defending, your defendant, or whether it benefits the DA. If it doesn't benefit you, then you just strike him and you say, I don't want this guy.
Right.
But if it's somebody that fits your narrative, hey, do you watch Fox News? Yes. Do you watch Truth Social? Yeah. Do you think that the government hides things from people? Yes. Perfect. Come here. You're one of my jurors. And then they select them. There were people sitting on the jury panel that were like conservatives, that only watch Fox News, only watch conservative news, and they still found him guilty.
Right. And what
believe in the party.
Yeah, I saw that too. And to your point, both sides, whether it's Trump's attorneys or the or Alvin Bragg, both of them get to strike down jurors, right? And they both have equal opportunity and like the same amount of I don't know what the technical term is, but they both can equally
peremptory challenges and motivated challenges. They get the same number, and they exclude the same amount of people. Yeah. And some of them don't even need a reason to exclude them. It could be even a hunch. The lawyers could have seen one and then be like, I think this guy's liberal, and then they exclude him. Yeah. They have all the opportunities in the world. And then once those jurors sit there and render their verdict, The judge has nothing to do with it but to give them instructions. Say,
Right.
and if you look at the instructions, it's 55 pages worth of them. He really sat down with them and said, you're not supposed to judge him based on his past shortcomings. You're not supposed to judge him on evidence that was stricken. You're only supposed to consider the documents that were presented in front of you that were redacted, the information that is not there. You're not supposed to speculate on it. You're not supposed to go on crazy theories on how, do you think he's going to go to jail or not? That doesn't matter. What matters is the task at hand. Judge Merchan was a masterful judge at guiding these jurors towards making the correct decision based on the rule of law. And it had nothing to do with like personal vendettas or the Democrats or the people out to get him. This was one of the cleanest trials that I've ever seen, if I ever seen one. But again, these people, they're like out of their fucking minds. They'll make anything, it's a cult. It's a cult mentality. They'll try to pull anything by the hairs to make it seem like, oh, this was rigged. It was not. They're rigging like a jury or like a case, a case of notoriety. It's just this one is near impossible, right? Because there's too many moving parts. Right. The law, people don't understand that the law really restricts you. It doesn't let you, the rules of evidence, the rules of criminal procedure, how you present the evidence. It's so complex that if people only knew how narrow the margin for error is, they would understand that they proved to be unreasonable doubt. And then he was found guilty on all 34 charges.
Right.
That's another one. If it was only like one or two, then you could have planted, doubt in terms of, well, what was the confusion? But no, it was like they saw everything and they had and they deliberated quickly, which is another sign that the case is pretty clear cut. They found him guilty on everything. They couldn't see anything that was at fault, like something that was murky. It was like, nope. We saw every single piece of evidence that was brought upon us, and there's no answer buts about it. The guy did it.
Yeah, and I think even if you somehow, some way believe they were able to rig that case and our entire criminal justice system is rigged, why would if the evil Democrats, quote unquote, are rigging our criminal justice system, why would they allow the president of the United States' son, Hunter Biden, to have a court case? He's literally having a court case right now on felony gun charges. As this is going on, you have Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. He was indicted, right? These are, other court cases that work against the Democratic Party. If the entire system was rigged by the evil left, as they claim, why would you allow these things that put a stain on not only the president of the United States, but then the Democratic Party as a whole? Why would they slide through? And so it's like their logic defies all rationale at the end of the day when you're talking about the talking points that they love to spew.
Yeah, that's why I love the principle of Occam's razor, right? Usually the simplest of answers is the correct one. It's more plausible that instead of a secret cabal rigging a court proceeding to find a man guilty, it's more simple to just say there's a group of people that live close by to Donald Trump that knew him to be a crook in the past, that saw the evidence, and the evidence was overwhelming, and they found him guilty. Happens every fucking day. There's thousands of cases in court where people are found guilty. His case is no different, and he will probably be found guilty in Georgia for organized crime violations for trying to overturn an election.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say as well, is this isn't obviously the only case he has that is ongoing. He has a RICO case in Georgia. But there's been all kinds of things going on with that. I mean, Fani Willis sort of getting in her own way with having a relationship with one of the other lawyers on her staff, and then there was a fucking delay because of that case had to happen if she could still stay on there. Obviously, Trump and his lawyers there are doing everything they can to appeal that decision to then make this court case go on well past the election, because the theory is if he's elected, he's going to pardon himself and all of this goes away essentially, right? Or worst case scenario, that nobody's going to arrest a sitting president, essentially, right? And
they'll pull him out by the hairs.
You think they would? Promise. You think so?
Absolutely, I believe in. If he gets, well, first off, he can't pardon himself. It's a state case, both in Georgia and in New York. So those two cases, he can't pardon himself. I said it on my podcast. If he gets found guilty on RICO, he's going to go to jail, because the problem is that you can't apply. The judge says that the punishment could be a minimum of 5 years, But the punishment doesn't have to be jail. It could be probation. That's a lot of people confuse that and say, no, he's a mandatory jail. No, mandatory jail sentencing and sentencing guidelines in regards to a minimum that you have to comply with is two different things. You have 5 years that you have to do either in prison or as probation. The judge can grant probation, but the problem is that when they do the pre-sentencing form and they say, hey, we want Donald Trump to classify from probation, and the lawyers ask for it, the judge is going to say, sorry, but your probation request has been denied because he's already has a felony from New York. As long as that felony stands on appeal and they don't revoke it, he's going to go to prison for at least 5 years for the RICO case, but because they can't give probation to a non-felon. And then if he's in the presidency, it won't matter. They go to the fucking White House and arrest him. People think they won't. They will. They absolutely fucking will. Nobody's above the law. Because if you have an arrest warrant for you and you're the president and nobody touches you, then we're in a dictatorship.
Right.
You see how problematic that is? So no, definitely we have to execute the laws of our country as they are written.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's sort of the fear that a lot of people have is he'll change things to a way that he'll somehow become the ultimate dictator and ruler of the United States, right? He talks about idolizing somebody like Putin and all these different things, right? I mean, that's why he loaded the Supreme Court and all these different things that he can do to try to get himself in the rule of that favor. You know what's ironic to me is any other country, we as like the U.S. Sitting on our high horse, if we saw a president of another country doing something corrupt, we'd be like, lock them up, right? They deserve to go to jail. But here it's like, oh my God, we can't lock up a sitting president, right? So it's like this double standard of because we're the United States, we're ultimate rule and order, but also because we're the United States, we have to pretend like we're perfect and we can't hold people to a certain standard. Right. And those two things just don't exist together.
Unless it's Hillary.
Right, exactly. Right.
They have no problem. Lock her up. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But if it's, our guy, yeah, these people are out of their goddamn minds.
Yeah.
Listen, my biggest worry is that one. We are hostage. We're being hostage by a cult.
Right.
The largest known to mankind.
Yeah.
It's bad. And we're risking civil war.
Well, that's the other thing to our point that there's millions of people who follow him. Who is to say that we saw January 6th sort of as his precursor to this, but him going to jail would be an even larger sort of stain on the MAGA movement than him losing the election, right? And if they went and tried to take over the Capitol, what would be the next thing if he was to actually be locked up and in prison at that point? Yeah.
I mean, in the best case scenario, I hope they lock him up.
Yeah.
Because then his presidency is done. Like, it's one of those things that you have to like thread the needle really carefully. But I think that at the end of the day, everybody should be held responsible for the crimes that they commit, even him. Now, how is it going to affect the MAGA movement and all that stuff? That remains to be seen.
Yep.
But the problem is that there are also positions in place to across many states to overturn the election. There's a lot of election denying within the GOP, and they're putting a lot of restrictions in place to not count the votes, to not certify votes in certain states. So we're really looking at a situation of election denying, of stealing votes, of voter suppression that is permeating within the GOP and the MAGAs, and it's going to cause a problem. I'm very worried for the state of our affairs and us as a country within the next 7 to 8 months. It's going to be very interesting, to say the least.
Well, because to your point, it doesn't just end with Donald Trump. He has sort of set the blueprint, right? So now somebody else from the Republican Party, even crazier, possibly smarter, could use that blueprint and run with it, right? They're all recognizing the power of the MAGA movement as they almost have to bow down to it at this point, right? And they have to bend and do the work of this movement. And again, I think ironically what they're not seeing, the things we critique about countries, they love to critique like Latin American countries, right? About how the government is so corrupt and how, the politicians are in the pockets of, these corrupt, cartels and all these different things. Mm-hmm. You guys are literally threatening judges, threatening their lives and putting pressure on them to rule the way that you want to. That what difference are you than the cartels that you're critiquing and the people you're trying to keep out of this country, right? The irony of all of that is you're literally doing the work of the very people that you're looking down upon. And if you're successful, you're going to duplicate what we see in those countries that you know is obviously complete chaos and harms them and holds them back from actually having a functioning government and a country that's really doing the will of the everyday people.
Correct. But they also criticize them because they're racist. You know, there's also an element of there's an element of white supremacy on why they criticize country where the majority of the people who live there are people of color and indigenous people. It's like we are superior to you. Our system of government is better than yours because you people are minorities and you're savages, right? Yeah. That's what they used to call us. Because you're savages, you can't manage your own country, but we are better at it. And you people are just like roaming around trying to make needs of whatever you can. But that comes from a place of supremacy. It's always been that way. And they can say it's not, but they're all full of shit. But that's the way it is.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And last thing I want to bring up, I had saw you sort of change your perspective on voting for Biden, right? I think the last time we spoke, you were sort of very adamant about the idea and your frustration that is shared with a lot of other people, particularly when we talk about the Israel and Palestine conflict that's happening. And you, like a lot of other people, were saying, how can I support Biden when he's not doing what I feel like needs to be done and is sort of standing by as a genocide is happening, basically, right?
Correct.
But I have seen you sort of say, you know, recently where you have made it public that you are going to vote for Biden. I'm curious what that mindset shift was for you.
Yeah. I think it was a specific event where they were having women lives at risk in Texas and Florida with the 30-day abortion ban, where women were literally like dying in some obscure hospital where they were being refused to being treated because these people want to pass legislation in regards to controlling women's bodies. And I have a daughter. So I have two situations that put me between a rock and a hard place. I have a lot of Palestinian friends, which are love and are dear to me. And what we're doing to them by financing this conflict and giving Israel more weapons and more money to continue the genocide is a problem. But at the same time, we cannot help them if we don't put our house in order.
Right.
And the only way that we're going to put our house in order is if we vote blue. Nothing good will come out of not voting for Biden because then Trump wins. And if Trump wins and the Republicans win the House and the Senate, we're basically going to have to leave this country because it's going to become a dictatorship. They're going to enable Christian law everywhere in the country. They're not going to allow women to contain their rights and to defend themselves and to have the rights to bodily autonomy. And on top of that, we're going to have a bunch of fascists running everything and they're going to mass deport everyone. And then what are we going to do? You know, on principle, it sounds great if we don't vote for Biden, but it's not really solving anything. Right. Sometimes you can't kill the patient trying to find the cure, you know? Yeah. And that's the situation that they put us as a country, as a nation, as a whole. I'm voting for him because for me, voting, and this is personal, I'm not telling anybody how to vote. If you want to not vote for him, that's fine. I respect that. I know where you're coming from. To me personally, I'm going to vote for him because to me, it's a vote for democracy. Right. And I don't want democracy to be eroded by a man who's a madman, which is Donald Trump, who's a criminal, a convicted felon. I'm not willing to let a convicted felon take the office. I would rather deal with a guy that is doing some things wrong, but at least if we have a blue system in place, we can change things from within. I don't identify with anything from the Republican Party. I don't share their beliefs. I don't share their nature. To me, they are an antiquated party that needs to go away like dinosaurs. You know, it's like, and we've seen it again and again, how they want to bring all these antiquated policies back. When they say make America great again, they're just saying, let's make it racist again so that we can do whatever the fuck we want. Control women's bodies, control black people, put more brown people in prison, keep minorities in check, and keep doing whatever the fuck we want. And that to me is a problem. I will not stand for that. That's why I'm voting blue.
Yeah, well, to each their own for sure. But I think you kind of hit the nail on the head where, listen, I have so much anger and disappointment towards the Democratic Party, you know, for so many different things. But now is not the time to kind of fuck around and find out almost, right? Like now is not the time, unfortunately, to hold them accountable, right? Because there's too much riding on this, you know. I think there's so much progress that needs to be made. But also on the flip side of it, things can get a hell of a lot worse if we don't make sure that Biden gets another term. And I think that is the unfortunate situation that we're in. And I think that as frustrating as it is, personally, there's just going to have to be some patience to sort of ride out this MAGA wave, and hopefully, Trump losing the election and hopefully, getting held accountable for all of his crimes allows us to begin to shift in another direction where then we can say, okay, now that we've cleared that up, the focus is on making sure the Democratic Party is actually doing the will of the people and not just running on the sort of campaign trail telling us that, that if we vote for the other side, we're doomed, essentially, right? And that's their only talking point. But now is not the time to hold them to that, which I think is something I definitely agree with you on that. And let's move on from this, because we'll give ourselves even more gray hairs talking about this. We'll take a quick break right now, and then we'll be right back with more. All right, so shifting gears a little bit here, I want to talk about an article that came out for People magazine. Eva Mendes was discussing why she had kids at 40 and how for her that was the best decision that she ever made. She sort of talked about in her 20s how she was incredibly immature, not ready for it. She talked about how she wanted to make sure she had her career first so that when she did have kids, she could devote all her time to staying with them when they were young. And I think this is a common sort of conversation happening, particularly my generation, millennials and younger. They're having kids less and less at an older rate, and even just less in general. There's a lot more thought happening in this, and there's obviously a lot of different reasoning for it. The economy is a tough one right now. To the idea of raising a family for many people, I mean, most people can't even think of getting a house affordably, let alone then having the house, the kid, and shit. The car is also now a brand new car is even something that seems out of reach for a lot of people with the way that the pricing is and things like that. So that is, I think, a lot of the mindset of the younger generation. I'm curious for you. I know you are a parent. When did you have your first kid? How old were you? Do you remember?
My first daughter, my first kid was my daughter, and she's 20 now. So I had her probably around 26. I was very young.
Yeah, so I mean, but that was sort of the standard, right? For a lot of people who grew up, your peers, that was sort of the standard. You have kids, in like you're in a perfect world, like mid to late 20s, whatever it is, and that's sort of the ideal thing. And I'm curious for you. You kind of see the shifting trend, the conversation in general, and I know you like to talk about dating and things like that as well. I mean, what is your kind of your thought process, looking back now a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, whatever works for everybody, that's a very individual and personal choice to having kids either earlier in life or later.
Sure.
In life. I've seen people have kids at 45, seen people have kids at 50. I believe somebody, I think it was Michael Douglas, he had kids like at 70 or some shit like that. Yeah, I think everybody needs to find their own definition of happiness within having children. I personally like the idea of having my kids young because I was 26 and then I had my son at 28. So now my daughter is turning 21 this year. I'm 48. I'm still dating, so I can enjoy my life fully because my children are grown. So I don't have to worry about raising small children. Some people want to start bringing that task into fruition at 45, at 50. Then your son, when he's a teenager, you're going to be 60.
Right.
I don't think they think it clearly until it happens. I think it's insane. I would never do it. But again, to each his own. If you want to choose developing a career first, I developed my career simultaneously with my children. I went to law school when they were babies. I was working at nights. I did a lot and I sacrificed a lot, but I also want to be able to enjoy my life without having to raise children later in life when I'm in my 50s. I want to enjoy my retirement. I'm like 10 years away from retiring. I want to be able to go to Puerto Rico, fish, enjoy the life that I want. But for some people, it works different. If you want to do it that way, you go right ahead. I mean, having children and raising children is a very personal choice. Even if you don't want to have children, there's a big movement right now on TikTok of they call it the childless parents. The childless people that are like dog parents and have cats. And it's like, hey, and people are like dogging on them. If you don't want to have children, and I have children, I tell them, fantastic. I respect your choice. Not everything is the same guide. If you choose to not have children and focus on your career and your life and your personal things, that's okay too. Everybody has to choose their own version of happiness, whatever that looks like,
Yeah, no, I think that's probably more than anything the conversation, right? Because the norm was you go to college, you basically get married right after college, you have the kids, you start the family, right? And that was sort of the one size fits all. And then like societally, you were kind of judged if you didn't have that by a certain point, right? And I think what the beautiful thing about these conversations, you're absolutely right, it is a personal decision for each and every person. I think the grandiose idea about it is that we're saying, hey, there is no right way, right? Like we're fed a lot of these societal standards, and we're taught that they're like facts when they're literally were the opinions of a few people that became adapted by the masses, essentially, right? And that's with most societal norms, right? That's why things change, where it's like, 30 years later, it's like, I can't imagine speaking to a woman that way. But 30 years ago, that was the societal norm. It doesn't mean it was right. It just means that was the popular choice during that time period, right? And, I think the beauty of sort of these things, and to your point, the TikTok, because I've seen that as well, those trends, they travel around the world. They're like, listen, I would spend this much money on having a kid. Instead, me and my spouse spend whatever, half our year traveling around the world. And we, like you said, we have our cat, we have our dog, we fucking love life, right? And that's a beautiful thing that they can sort of celebrate their own personal feeling on how they see fit in their life. And I think that's more of why I love hearing these types of conversations, because it sort of gives people the okay to design your life by what makes sense for you, not by what society is telling you is the norm, right? You're not a failure if you don't check that fucking box. It's, I think as I've gotten older, you really recognize like how valuable time is, and any time wasted doing something that just isn't in line with you, be it a relationship, be it kids, be it a job, is really a sad loss of something so precious and finite as our time here on this earth.
Yeah, people don't understand the daunting task that it is raising children. It's an entire different situation. It's a tiny little human that mimics you and views the world through you and the decisions that you make. So it's very important to be steady and readily aware of what's coming, and also, the things that might happen that might not be perfect. My son had an accident that almost took his life. So we as a family had to come together and figure out a way to bring him back to normalcy and give him a chance. And those things will cause extreme pain sometimes, with great happiness also sometimes comes with great pain of dealing with a child maybe getting sick or getting into an accident or getting into a life of crime or not making the best choices. There's a lot of things that can happen. The problem is that parents view magazines and pictures and ideas in their head of the beautiful white picket fence with the dog playing with the children in the backyard. But sometimes it's not like that, and you have to be ready for whatever may come.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think we get caught in like the fantasy of these things, right? And we don't actually weigh all the responsibility that comes along with it, right? And for some people, that's just not what they're inclined to want out of life, and that's okay. Or for some people, they didn't mature in their 20s to the point where they felt comfortable bearing that, right? And it wasn't until later in life that they became a little bit more cognizant of being able to maintain that sort of responsibility, right? And again, that's like to each their own. I think that is the beautiful part about these sort of conversations and these examples, is just allowing people to live as they see fit, man. Like that's really all that it comes down to. I think life is too short to get caught up in the bullshit of like the noise of the comment section and everything else,
Correct.
So I want to move on.
What it's about.
Go ahead.
It's great. Look at it. This guy. He's like a good pal. He's great. He's cheap. Feed him like twice a day. Keep it simple, baby.
Right, and he's good. And he's good to go. And then you'll be fishing in Puerto Rico before you know it.
There you go.
All right, so let's move on to some positive news that has come out recently. We'll do it a part of our Mi Gente segment, but first we'll take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Mi Gente. All right, so let's start in Mexico, right? So there's obviously, historically, we talk about the idea of machismo culture in Latin America. It exists in white culture as well. It's called toxic masculinity, right? I love the narrative that ends up happening where because it happens to brown people, it's worse than the exact relevant part of it that white people have, right? But to make that distinction, and in this country, the most progressive, allegedly, country in the world, right? There was a lot of talk about, people, when Hillary was running, they wouldn't vote for her solely because she was a woman and they didn't believe a woman could lead the country, right?
Correct.
So many tropes about women and her ability to handle her emotions and all the nonsense that comes along with that, right? And
Right.
people that are quote unquote viewed as lesser than, that we don't want in our country, seem to be a little bit more progressive than we even are here in the United States of America, as Mexico, for the first time in 200 years, will have a female president of the country, who, by the way, regardless of her policies and things like that, this woman is a badass. She's a physicist with a PhD. She is a part of a group of scientists who received the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, she is somebody who, her family are survivors of the Holocaust. She's of Jewish descent. Their family fled from the Holocaust and moved to Mexico. So this is somebody who has been, accomplishing so many great things. I mean, she was the Secretary of the Environment for Mexico City, then, first woman head of the government of Mexico City. So somebody that obviously is also very progressive and potentially could be helping lead the charge in environmental, progression, as well as when we talk about a place like Mexico, which borders our country, which is a country of great importance, obviously, right? Because there's so much talk about the border and immigration, all these different things. I think it's just, and obviously a lot of work to be done there. It's just a beautiful sort of moment to see how far we've come, that a woman can become president there and sort of beat down some of the nonsense of stereotypes that have kept, sort of women trying to play catch up for so long.
Yeah, the machismo thing against the Latinos is bullshit, because this is the only country, the United States, where you take the name of your wife and replace it with yours.
That's a good point.
We don't do that in Puerto Rico or in Latin America. You take your mother's name and your father's name, and you have both of them. Porque tengo mal, like we used to say in Puerto Rico. But here it's like women are immediately erased when they get married, and they lose part of their identity as change their name.
Right.
People are full of shit. They say they are progressive, but they're not. And they call us macho, but we already have a leader. We have a Puerto Rican governor. We had two of them that were women in Puerto Rico. And now the president of Mexico is a woman, a prepared one at that. So I think it's great. I think it's an advancement for the people of Mexico. I think the country is going to become more powerful now, because we know that there's other women that are world leaders.
Right.
So those women, such as in New Zealand and places like Denmark, there's a lot of people where women are holding positions, and unfortunately, men have done a shit job with being world leaders.
Sure.
More war than every other time in the history of the world. We're like fucking going at each other's throats. Toxic masculinity thing is not working out for everybody, so it's time to give the women a chance and let them lead. And I think they will do a fantastic job. I am very looking forward to what Mexico is going to look like within the next 4 years. Unfortunately, the dealings with the United States is going to be hard, because there's still a lot of machismo in the United States, a lot of misogyny. This country, I always said, the United States is more misogynist than it is racist. So at this point, we'll see how, Republicans are going to want to work with Mexico in terms of that regard, being led by a woman. I know they'll probably have a problem with it, because as you all know, the GOP is the party of misogyny and discrimination against women. So we'll see. There's a few pygmies out there that are happy with being servants of the Republican Party, but I know that we're quickly progressing and that women are having their voices being heard finally after all this time. So it's a very interesting time for Mexico, and I think they're going to do great, and I congratulate them on their choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And a country that has endless amounts of potential to be even more powerful than it already is, And I think that is the beauty. I mean, honestly, most Latin American countries, you can say that there are a lot of people who are, you hear like these passport bros and things like that, right? Going to Medellin and these different places. But it's like, there's a lot of people kind of realizing like, oh, wait, the idea that I was fed about these places just being complete chaos and in disarray and uncivilized is actual complete bullshit. And these are some of the most beautiful places on earth with some of the friendliest people on earth. And obviously, like anywhere else, they have their problems, but they have endless amounts of potential for anybody who actually gives a shit and wants to take charge on doing that and try to fix those problems. And I think Mexico, again, is a great example because of the relationship they have with the United States, right? And the potential for, having, just that, sharing that border and the things that are produced over there that we take over here, and shit, I mean, tourism that happens over there is very common. It's very common for us in the U.S. to go over there. There's so many different potential, and it's a beautiful landscape of endless potential. And yeah, I think it's exciting to sort of see, like, there's progressive minds happening over there, coming out in droves. Really, the possibilities are endless for what a place like Mexico could become, and the tone it possibly could set for all of Latin America as a whole.
Yep. It's such an amazing time. And her climate change policies are fantastic.
Exactly.
Because she has a PhD in energy and energy affairs. And it's what we need to move the country forward in terms of future progressive ways of thinking with regards on how we deal with climate change, with the effect on climate in the countries that surround Mexico. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how the scientific method, the scientific model, and her thoughts in terms of how we approach these problems worldwide is going to help the country.
Yeah.
She is a brilliant mind. She was actually chosen by the Great British as one of the most influential and smart women in the world, with the top 100. So I'm very, very excited for Mexico. I think eventually we'll have to do it in the United States too, and choose a woman president. I think it will be a great idea, and it give us something to think about in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm almost jealous, because I would love to see what would happen if we actually had somebody who's legitimately brilliant and a scientist leading the country during a really crucial period of humanity where we fucking let things like pollution and climate change get out of control, right? What would happen if we actually had somebody of a certain level of intelligence that isn't about playing the political game necessarily, right? That's not their background per se of being that, but instead is somebody very well educated at a high superior level, and trying to change the world for the better, right? Literally, that was the work she was doing with the United Nations, was climate work, and understanding the importance of that, right? And that's what makes me as excited, where it's like the idea of like, oh, what happens if we actually empower genuinely brilliant people and allow them to sort of take charge, rather than like, who's the most charismatic, who has, the cooler following, who has the best merch, right? Like, what if we actually put it in the hands of capable people? Where could we be as a world, and as a country? Obviously in the US I'm talking about too.
Wouldn't it be amazing if we had a smart woman who was prepared, who was a scientist, who was brilliant, leading us, instead of an orange animal who doesn't know. Scored very high on my test. I got the highest scores.
Right.
The highest scores in college. They didn't understand that.
What haunts me almost too is, I'm like, I wonder what would have happened if Elizabeth Warren would have gotten the nomination and became president, because she's so anti-fucking big corporation, which is one of the biggest problems that we have as a country, is they're fucking like bleeding us all dry because of corporate greed. What would happen if that was the person who was in charge of everything and actually was trying to hold these fucking people accountable rather than playing their little games? Like that literally keeps me up at night sometimes.
Yeah, but there's also the problem that in the United States, you also have to be connected to these corporations. And
right.
Biden plays that game really good. That's why Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and AOC are people that are hated within the Democratic Party. But people like Pelosi and Biden are celebrated because they still support that side of corporate America. That's why I always laugh when Republicans say, oh, you are the party of handouts. And I'm like, you're crazy. The Democrats are the highest party of capitalism in the fucking country. They love capitalism just as much as you do. But they think we're not.
But I mean, in fact, they're actually better at capitalism than you guys are. Unfortunately, it's actually the opposite. Their states are almost too expensive to live in because they're profiting so much and they're charging the shit out of everybody, right? So actually,
if you think
you should love them. You should love them.
Yeah, bro. If you think Democrats don't like capitalism, come to Denver and try to buy a house in Highland.
Yeah, what the fuck?
The average price is like $1 million. So
exactly.
Yeah, we like capitalism too,
bro. And red states are the ones literally getting the handouts from the federal funds of welfare and all those things. Like, what the, bro? It's the fucking Twilight Zone. It really is, and that's what is so scary about all of. It's not fact based, and the information is literally right. It's right in front of you. It's very readily available. But we play this game of like, oh, this is my sports team. I got to find a reason to support them, even if it doesn't make sense. That's the fucked up part.
Yeah, it's incredible to see, but we'll figure it out eventually. It's a game of
Eventually, maybe you and I might be long gone, but eventually, hopefully,
our children will deal with it.
Yeah. Let's end on Pride Month, right? We're here in June in Pride Month.
Yes.
And a lot, I mean, this is like the irony of like white supremacy, I think, in general, and the idea of just whiteness always being at the forefront. So much history gets lost as a result, right? And unfortunately, I think even we as people of color don't even know our own history because it's been whitewashed so much, right? And, there's a lot of unfortunate homophobia that has traditionally happened within communities of color. And the irony is that we've been there from the start, and there are figures who have been a part of that history in helping those communities grow and be included in the conversation that is today. So there was a quick story I want to touch on for Pride Month. That was a very famous riot that happened here in New York City that was led by women of color. And I've DJ'd the Pride March every year for, I don't even know at this point, 6-7 years. And like the focal point is the Stonewall Inn, which was it still is a gay bar located in Lower Manhattan. And what a lot of people sort of, I think, miss about this history, again, because it is a marginalized community, it was dangerous to be gay, in the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, where literally the police would raid venues because they were gay venues. And in June 28th, 1969, you actually had the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar located, like I said, in Lower Manhattan, and it was raided by the police. This was a consistent thing, and eventually people said enough is enough, and they fought back. And it got to the point where the police actually set fire to the venue itself, but the people fought in the streets, and it brought on what they're saying, a standoff that lasted 45 minutes. But it brought attention to the just utter abuse that was happening at the hands of police solely for the reason that these people were gay and dancing together. That was literally the reason why the police were being called and raiding and uprooting these people's entire lives, arresting them. And a lost part of that is that it was actually two transgender women of color who were the ones to stand up, and they literally threw the first stone. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera ignited this sort of fight back that happened against the police that brought all of this attention, and is an important moment in LGBTQ plus history that still lives on today, of the people standing up against the powers that be who are trying to oppress them, and just something beautiful I think needs to be shined a light on.
Yeah, amazing, because it's always been about the fight against white supremacy, because white supremacy and Christian nationalism has not only been against marginalized communities such as Black people and Latino people and Indigenous people, but one of those groups are Latino and marginalized communities is the LGBTQ community as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the fight against them to live their lives as they want, to be free and to have the same rights as everybody else, to get married, to find love, to have access to safe healthcare. This has always been a fight and a plight of the people of the LGBTQ community. Mm-hmm. My daughter belongs to that community, so it's very dear to me. I try to speak on their voices as much as they can, and I hate the traditional discrimination that has happened against them, especially in Latino communities as well. Mm-hmm. So it's very important that we keep fighting in the forefront of their rights to be protected. Right now, I think it's in Mississippi where they're passing a law that any professor or any teacher uses pronouns, they can be deemed as a sexual offender and they can be charged. So it's horrible. We're seeing it happen all over again, where these marginalized communities are being fought against. Their books that are educational in nature, these books are being canceled. They're being taken off shelves everywhere around the state of Florida and Texas. So, they're saying it's like deviant sex, like horrible, but it's the hetero norms of the Christian culture, right?
Yes.
Where they want to suppress anything that isn't their traditional family, so as they call it. It's complete bullshit. It's, horrible in nature because it attempts to destroy the core of people that should have the same rights as everybody else. They just want a space in their communities, in our society, and they have a right to exist. Their lives are just as important as anybody else's. and we need to keep voicing this. And this month is great that they're putting an entire 30 days dedicated to this cause, because it's still a problem to this day, and they're still fighting the good fight. So shout out to the people of the LGBTQ community. You are loved, you are heard, and we will keep fighting for you as progressive and as liberals that we are.
Yeah, well said. And just the last thing I'll even touch on is like you look at the AIDS epidemic and the lack of flat out interest in doing anything to help those people. That was homophobia right there. Because it was affecting the gay community and not the heterosexual community, there was zero interest in trying to stop it, and so many people unnecessarily lost their lives because they were just ignored, because their lives didn't matter to the powers that be. And I highly recommend, a weird place that I really learned about this was like American Horror Story, when they did a whole season on kind of the era of the AIDS epidemic, and it really made you understand the pain and trauma that people who were living during that time period went through, seeing their friends and loved ones just dropping like flies because nobody actually gave a shit, because they were a community that people, quite frankly, actually just would have rather been gone from New York City, basically, right? And where it takes place. And I think when you see it on that massive level, you really do recognize how widespread of an issue homophobia is, to the point that we literally allowed thousands and thousands of people to die unnecessarily because the powers that be literally did not give a shit about these people and didn't value their lives. And that's why it's so important to, for people to unapologetically have a pride flag, right? That's why, like, but people who complain about, oh, I don't want to see this when I'm in Target, or why does this restaurant flying a flag? You're literally missing the entire point of this. Is without these people being able to feel seen and heard, literally they were sentenced to death because of that. Because they had to exist in the shadows, they were literally sentenced to a life of death because of this disease that ran rampant, and nobody gave a shit to actually do anything about it. And that's the same reason why, piggybacking off of that, Puerto Ricans fly our flag, because it was once illegal to fly the Puerto Rican flag. And absolutely. I think people, to your point, lack any real knowledge and just rush to their immediate gut instinct based upon the ignorant views that have been passed down to them from generation to generation. And we all need to stop for a second and really understand the amount of pain and trauma that has been passed down from generation to generation for all marginalized communities. And the history is there, for you to learn about. And I think the more we can have these open discussions and talk about moments like this, the more understanding people can realize, wow, it is important, for us to recognize and have moments and be seen, and for everybody to feel heard and safe at the end of the day.
Yeah, correct. A fantastic take on the Puerto Rican flag, because it's the same as a sign of the representation of struggle.
Right.
The same with the pride colors. It's a sign of, we have been fighting on this. We did it for a while, and we want to keep putting it out there so that we're not forgotten, so that we don't go back to that time where it was illegal to display those colors, where we were marginalized and we kept our voices shut because we didn't want to cause any problems and we wouldn't want to ruffle any feathers. So it's very important to keep being voiceful about it. Again, it's good that we are now passing legislation to protect that community. Go watch the documentary How to Survive a Plague. It's fantastic on how the AIDS epidemic affected all people from the community, and how there was legislation later passed to protect the access to safe healthcare, to medication, to treatment, so that we could, as a community, come together and help a group of people that were literally being left to die because of their beliefs and because of their choices and because of how they were born. It's horrible, but luckily we're getting better. We're getting more progressive by the minute, and hopefully this will be a problem that will be a thing of the past.
Absolutely. My brother, always good to catch up with you and get your take on things. Where do you want to push people to? I know we don't know what the fuck's going on with TikTok, or we kind of do. So I know you're preparing for the mass exodus of TikTok. Where do you want to push people to?
I'm preparing for the worst. I'm still going. I actually just hit 500,000 followers. So thank you, everybody.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for following. I do have a podcast available on Spotify, on YouTube, and on Apple Podcasts, Mofongo Wars. The link is available on my bio on TikTok, and you see it says YouTube. If you click on that, it will take you straight to my podcast, Mofongo Wars. New episode out every Monday. I already have 4,000 followers, so it's growing pretty quick. Keep supporting, keep following. There's a lot of stuff that I can say there that I cannot say on TikTok, so it's great. It gives me an avenue to be fully open. The episodes are very interesting. I did one about Trump recently with Derek Mayo, my good friend. You're gonna love it. Everybody that goes in says it's amazing. It's the best podcast I've seen in a while. I did a very good job of crafting it in a way that it could be informative and entertaining and fun. So go check it out. Mofongo Wars, available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Love it, bro. And if they want to follow your TikTok, what's the TikTok handle again?
Luisito Rio 787, and that's how you find me on YouTube too. If you click Luisito Rio 787, if you type it in, it will pop up. Still there, still on TikTok, giving hell to these fucking Trump supporters that annoy the shit out of me. I'm not gonna stop on the planet.
And we love you for it, brother. Well, listen, man. Again, always good catching up with you. We'll do this again soon. Hopefully, we won't have to wait till another conviction from Trump. But I'm sure, as things are going, we'll have plenty of things to talk about.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for inviting me. Shout out to the good people of New York. Much love, brother. Take care.
Man, big shout out to my guy Luisito for hopping on the show. Always nice to get his perspective, particularly with a lot of topics we were talking about, or more so, I should say, when it comes to Trump. It's nice to actually talk to an actual attorney rather than a TikTok attorney. So that is refreshing for sure. Big shout out to him for hopping on the show. And, man, I want to get y'all's take. I know I've been slacking with the Ask A Gringo, so I want to get y'all's take on one of these topics that we were talking about today. So let's do it in our Ask A Gringo segment.
Ask a Gringo.
I have a question. All right, so I wanted to get your guys' perspective, and at DJ Dramos, you want to be a part of these conversations that we have. I try to do it for each and every show. Sometimes I'm better at it than other times, but I want to get your perspective on the idea of having kids and the ages that it tends to happen, or based off of the conversation about Eva Mendes and what Luisito and I were talking about when it comes to children, and the sort of social norm of people having kids usually in their mid to late 20s, and that seemingly not being as much of a normal thing, particularly my generation and younger. And yeah, I think to each their own. I think in general, this isn't shaming anyone or here to make anybody feel bad. I think it's more so a beautiful thing for people to sort of just choose what works best for them. For me personally, I don't have kids, not yet. I want to have kids for sure. I'm 36, which is crazy to say. So I'm on the older end over here when it comes to, I guess, the norm. I definitely, if I think about it, wasn't ready in my 20s, like, without a doubt. It wasn't even really, it was on my mind, but not even something I was genuinely like wanting to do at that point in life. I think I definitely wanted to be able to focus on my career and establish that. It meant so much to me, and I think if I would have had kids at that time, I would have 100% been too emotionally immature to be the type of dad that I want to be. But I think also I wouldn't have been able to make my children and my family a priority. I was too passionate about my career and doing the, things that I love doing, that I don't regret it. I definitely am like, a little too single for comfort right now, I would say. But I think you got to just allow things to happen as they will. I think for me, when I think about it, and yeah, there's a fear of being the old parent. I'll preface this before we get into your stuff. I want to just dig into it a little bit. But I think I definitely am happy with like the amount of work I've done, even just over the last few years. I know for sure I'm going to be a more effective and better parent. And not to say that I would have been a bad parent before, but I think I have a lot more to offer a kid these days, and I'm proud to say that. So on the positive side, I look at it in that way. And our paths are our paths. I think if you have kids, amazing. Congratulations. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. If you don't yet and you want them, there's no shame. And we, things happen as they're supposed to. And if you don't want kids, no shame in that either. I think the idea of all of this is finding and what works for us, having the awareness to say, hey, this is what I want. This is what would make me happy. This is where I think I would show up at my best, and living life accordingly, regardless of what anybody else fucking has to say about it. I think that's the point at the end of the day. Now, with that said, I asked y'all, if you had kids, do you wish you had them later in life? If you don't have kids, what do you kind of think is your perfect time frame? Just to kind of gauge where people's heads are at. So let's see. At Cali.boy.auth says, I would have waited if I could go back. Money was tight and dreams had to take a back seat. And I think I love the honesty. I appreciate that. And I think, not that I think your kids listen to this, but just prefacing a case, I don't think this is a conversation where like anybody should feel like, damn, my kids should feel like, oh, I regret having them. But I think it's just the idea of if you could choose in a perfect world, like what would be the type of lifestyle you want to live. And I think, realistically, money is a real conversation. I think sometimes things happen and we can't plan ahead, but I think in cases where we're a little bit able to be a little bit more conscious of the decisions that we're making and plan ahead a bit, money is a real thing. I would hate to bring a kid into this world and have to not give them all that they deserve because I'm struggling financially, and I would hate to add to the stresses in my life. Like our kids are already stressful, and being in a serious relationship is already stressful. On top of having money problems, like that's all like a perfect storm for a disaster, essentially. So in a perfect world, I think for me, that was part of what I thought about it. What I have thought about a lot as well is like, I'm too, for younger, I was too unstable in my career where I really couldn't genuinely provide a good quality of life for kids. And I think, for me also, I didn't want to regret the idea of not chasing my dreams. Again, I don't think I would be the person that's in front of you today had I not have chased my dreams. So I appreciate you for being honest on that one. At Sylvia EAP says, early to mid 30s for financial stability, patience, wisdom, fitness, steadiness. Kids take a lot out of you. And in all honesty, if I could, in like a perfect world, if you were like, oh, could we like rebuild our life and do things in a perfect sense? Personally, I would say probably early 30s. I would definitely say that. I think definitely maybe like 3 years ago, I would love to have had my first kid if that was like an option, right? I don't think me 3 years ago was necessarily ready for it. But again, in a perfect world where I can like compact all the maturity I've gotten over the last 3 years and give it to 33-year-old version of me, I would have loved to have been able to do that, for sure. But I think, I think there's a lot of people talking about like being an old parent and the energy needed and all those different things. And I think that's definitely a fair point. I think, father time is undefeated, as they say. But what I will also say is on the topic of like conscious living, which, I push big. It's one of the fundamentals of Just Be, my wellness brand, 4 pillars of conscious living, is, we live in a world where there's a lot of information out there and some of that could be how to take care of yourself, right? People are living longer than ever. We have all kinds of supplements and options when it comes to healthy eating and just information and opportunities to exercise are everywhere we look, and I think if you consciously are making the decision like I am, to have kids, what some might consider later in life, I think for me what's really been what I've been reflecting on and stewing on as of very recently is like, okay, I am obviously going to be a slightly older dad than maybe some of my peers. What can I kind of do to make sure that I can keep up with kids? And one of those things is like really getting serious about my health. I think I've gotten better in the last few years or so, but I could be exercising a lot more frequently. I could be taking more vitamins and nutrients and really being a lot more conscious of those things, right? So again, I'm the guy who preaches conscious living and honoring your future self and like you 2.0, all those things. So I should start living as the man that I want to be. Start living that healthier lifestyle. Don't wait until I have a kid. Start living it now so it becomes my routine and I'm already living that and maybe can extend my life expectancy and also just extend my energy and my ability to keep up just a bit longer than what is the sort of traditional norm. So just things that I think about. And lastly, the homie at Brent J Life Coaching says, I had my first at 27 and my partner was 30. Then my next was at 29 and I thought those ages were pretty appropriate. We had both already passed our party phase and still had enough energy to go through the wildness of no sleep that first year. Part of me thinks I could have waited more, and at the same time, I think there's no quote, perfect timing to become a parent. It's just one of those life-changing circumstances that you just don't know until it happens. Beautifully said. And I like that distinction. I think a lot of people maybe didn't get that party phase and they go through life regretting it. I think there's like normal rites of passage, and obviously we're all different, but I know for me, I'm happy that I fucking went through an extended party phase and I lived it up. I'm happy that I, was blacking out in Vegas and Miami and, and while I've always been pretty responsible, I'm just happy that I got to do stupid things. Happy I got to have a shore house on the shitty, the shitty and shady Jersey Shore and live that life, right? And I don't look on Instagram anymore and wonder what that's like, or, I think it's natural to have some FOMO, but not really. Even me as like a single guy, who has the option to go and party if I felt like it. I have friends who still are single and want to go out and do things. I have a lot of DJ friends who are all over the place that I can go hang out with them, and they're still in the lifestyle. But, for the most part, I still go out every once in a while, but for the most part, I love having my Friday night at home, ordering takeout and just chilling with my dog, and I think I couldn't say that 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, right? I would want to be out. If I had a free night off, I was out all the time. And I think if I would have had a kid before I got that out of my system, I probably would have longed for a life and just wondered what I was missing. Whereas now I'm already living as a single guy. And maybe sometimes I'm doing it too much where I'm like, I'm aging myself a little bit unnecessarily. But I do think for me, I'm able to live, with knowing that I don't have any regrets. I know that I had a lot of great life experiences, and I'm able to kind of live the more mature next phase that is needed to become a parent. And for me, that took, 35, 36 years of life on this earth to get to that place, and I think life doesn't make any mistakes, and I think we all just need to know each other, need to know ourselves, and have awareness around what is best for us. So, no shame in whatever sort of place you are or decision you make, just whatever's right for you and wherever you are in this life, I think is the moral of that story. Thank you all so much for participating. Those who did, at DJ Dramos on Instagram, you want to be part of those conversations. And without further ado, let's just tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, so I'll keep it short and sweet because we really dove into these things extensively. Episode's running a little bit long, I know, so I want to keep it a little bit short. But Trumpy trumping, I think, is the moral of that story. I think there's a lot of scary what ifs, right? I think this is a really important election coming up. I think we said that in 2020. This feels even more imminent because of just how brazen and scarier things have gotten when it comes to the political division in this country and the lengths with which people will go to remain in power and to support those in power. And, Trump seemingly only getting stronger, and the obsession with him only getting stronger, regardless of what we've seen. I think people continue to have asked the question and continue to ask the question, what will it take for his supporters to sort of recognize who he really is and stop following him blindly? And I think we all have gotten our answer. It's absolutely nothing. Doesn't matter if it's a felony conviction. Doesn't matter whatever you throw out there, they will find an excuse to justify him, his behavior, and blame it on somebody else. So we're past the point of reasoning. And I think those of us who aren't blindly supporting somebody like him, I think it's up to us to come out and show up in November and make our voices heard and hope that others, do the same. That's really all I could kind of say about that. And I don't gloat about it. I know we laugh about certain things about it and we poke fun at him and things like that, but I think I think we have to recognize the gravity of this situation as well, where yes, it's nice to see him get held accountable, but it's really a really nasty stain on our country and not one that we should take lightly. And I think the world is watching. And the same way that we love to judge other countries who have their issues, best believe they're looking at us and doing the same right now. Now, Eva Mendes talking about kids and waiting later in life. We talked about that extensively. Again, to each their own. And I love how we're no longer subscribing to asinine norms, but people just saying, hey, this is what's best for me, and I'm going to do it regardless of what anybody else thinks. And I think that's the goal here. Mexico electing its first female president. I think it is a beautiful moment for the world. I think for progression. I think it's beautiful to see a woman get put into power in that sort of place. And I think, again, it speaks to how we, the United States, are not the center of the universe, and we are not necessarily always right and the most progressive, because other countries are really giving us a run for our money there in this stance right here. And I think also when you talk about this person being a fucking physicist and a part of a Nobel Prize winning team, it's like, dude, she is somebody who has made it like her life's work to focus on the environment and climate, and now she's the president of a major country, and that potentially could revolutionize that country in a positive way, but also could set a precedent for climate, scares in the world, right? I think if you're not worried about the climate, you're probably living under a rock at this point. It's a real thing, climate change, and we need smart people who are purpose-driven and really trying to do the right thing. We need them in positions of power, and I think that's a beautiful thing to see somebody like her doing that. It's exciting. And then when it comes to Pride Month here and this story of tradition of women of color leading this really legendary riot in New York City, I think it's just a great reminder of the fact that people of color have always been a part of conversations and monumental moments, but I think also we have to understand the value in celebrating. A lot of people will criticize, why do we need a whole month? We have to fly. Like, again, as we talk about Luisito, we're doing this because we have to remind the world about the atrocities that can take place for people when they don't have a voice, right? The AIDS epidemic didn't need to be what it became, but because that community was marginalized and looked down upon and didn't have a safe space and a voice and couldn't share their voice safely, that's what happened. They were ignored. And again, we make jokes and about how proud Puerto Ricans are and we fly our flags and things like that. That's all rooted in a trauma of it being illegal for us to fly our own flag at one point. It was illegal for us to have pride in where we came from. Our voices were being silenced. Our history is being silenced and erased, essentially. That's why we fly those flags so proudly. Because at one point we sort of had to live almost in shame of where we came from and hide ourselves. And living like that is how you become marginalized and how your voices never get heard and how you get taken advantage of and you become just another cog in the system, hoping for the best, and other people are making decisions based upon they're making decisions that affect your life without you in mind, essentially, because you don't have a seat at the table, because you're being forced into hiding, essentially. That's why these things are so important. So food for thought for anybody dealing with annoying people in their life who make comments like that one. Or listen, if you're one of those people who's like, I don't get it, that's why. Because without it being out there spoken about loudly, the powers that be will largely ignore these marginalized communities. And that's why it's important to be loud and proud, as they say. With that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in to today's episode. Have an amazing weekend, and I will catch you next week on Tuesday with a brand new one. Until then, stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Peace.